We're actually going to start. I don't know. Have you started the webinar?
I have asked Francesco to launch the YouTube. It only takes 15 seconds.
Okay, I think you can go ahead, please.
Okay. Yes, there are so many attendees already, so I think we can start. I'm just going to wait 30 more seconds to make sure that we are recording. We are also connected. Okay. So we have 42 people already connected. And so I think I'm going to start and welcome everybody to this seminar, which is part of the RIA Research webinar series, and it's the edition of March. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, and I don't know from where you are connecting, and so I wish you all a good day. This is the third seminar of 2021 of RIA Research webinar, who brings together researchers from all around the world. And we aim to present interesting and relevant evidence in order to share knowledge that can inform IFAD and other development partners on programming of investment and projects, with the objective of enhancing development impact in rural communities. And what we want to bring about is really to bring the state of the art in topics that are relevant for IFAD operation and for evidence-based. And today I have the pleasure, a very big pleasure, to introduce Dr. Yan Liu of IFPRI and her co-authors from IFPRI, Cornell Universities, and the World Bank. We are also very privileged to have Dr. Bekele Shifero of the Independent Evaluation Group of the World Bank, who will be our discussant. I know Yan from many years, and we shared time together when I was in Washington, D.C. during our short visit that me and her used to do at the Development Economic Research Group. Before I pass the floor to Arthur Maipiso, who is our senior economist at RIA and also in charge of many of the GIS related activities that we conduct for our impact assessment, and who will be the moderator for today's session. First, I would like to apologize because I will need to leave for an unplanned meeting right after the opening, but I'm sure that the conversation and the presentation will be very lovely. And I would like to only take the opportunity to make a few remarks on the paper that will be presented today. The use of satellite imagery and remote sensing data for impact assessment is increasingly being applied on rural development projects. Its use is expanding our analytical capabilities and provides a complement to our existing research methods to better measure impact of rural development projects. This is particularly the case for environmental outcomes such as land cover and forestry, which can better measure using high-resolution satellite imagery data. These data are time series in nature, allowing a better understanding of the dynamics of change in outcome over time. For instance, measurement of the baseline conditions prior to project intervention can be implemented using remote sensing, just as sustainability of impact well after project closure. Within RIA, we're also leveraging remote sensing data and satellite imagery for analysis. In this process, we hope to employ the state-of-the-art methodologies to complement our already rigorous impact assessment. And now I leave the floor to Arthur Maipiso, our senior economist in RIA, to introduce our speaker, discussant, and moderate the seminar. Thank you all for participating. You are already very numerous. We have more than 60 people connected, and I'm very happy that those meetings seems to be very relevant for many people and for our large audience. Thank you all.
Thank you, Sarah, for those remarks, and welcome everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. Would like to basically first just go over a bit of housekeeping in terms of making sure our webinar experience is smooth, and then we will jump into the presentation. In terms of the Zoom functionalities, we will be using the question and answer icon or box to actually interact. So we encourage you to send in your questions, and we will try to address them at the end after the presentation and after the comments from the discussant. In terms of the order, we will have the presentation from Dr. Yanyan Liu, followed by comments from the discussant, Dr. Bekele Shifro, from the World Bank's Independent Evaluation Group. And then we will open up for questions and answers. We will also have panelists. These are the co-authors to the paper from IFPRI, Cornell University, as well as the World Bank, who will hopefully be available as well to provide some responses to any questions that you may have. Now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce a longtime friend and a colleague, Yanyan Liu. She's a senior research fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute in Washington, D.C. And she has extensive research experience. And I just want to highlight that most of her research focuses on impact evaluation, microfinance, microinsurance, and economic transformation. She has published in top-tier journals, including in the Economic Journal, American Journal of Agricultural Economics, World Development, and the Journal of Applied Econometrics, among others. So without further statements, Yanyan, thank you, welcome, and over to you for the presentation.
Hi, thank you, Arthur, and thank you, Sarah, for your invite and for the nice introduction. Thank you, everyone, for having me today. In this paper, we use remote sensing data, open access remote sensing data to evaluate a large-scale land restoration project in the world, implemented by the government of Ethiopia and funded by the World Bank. Let me first introduce my co-authors. It's co-authored with Susanna, which is my colleague at IFRI, and Jiaming Wen and Ying Sun at Cornell University. They are in crop science department, and they are our GIS specialist. And also Shun is an economist at the World Bank. Let me first talk about the motivation of our study. As we know, the livelihoods of rural populations in developing economies are threatened by anthropogenic land degradation. This is getting worse with climate change. Development agencies have invested heavily in sustainable land management projects to battle land degradation and to improve livelihood resilience to severe weather conditions. However, rigorous impact evaluation has been lagged behind the widespread implementation of such program due to data limitations. As we know that conventional impact evaluations relying on household surveys are not quite suitable for these projects for a number of reasons. For example, the program often starts before a proper baseline survey has been conducted, as the case of our program being evaluated. And also, the program impacts often materialize over many years. And to capture the dynamic program effects, we need to conduct many household surveys, and the cost is usually quite high. Also, the high cost of doing surveys also make it difficult to include a sufficient number of observations hit by natural disasters to examine the resilience outcome. Our study overcomes the shortcomings of those conventional impact evaluation method by combining satellite imagery products and quasi-experimental impact evaluation methods to investigate the impacts of Ethiopia's sustainable land management project. This project targets watersheds in Ethiopia's highlands. It's implemented by 3 phases. The first phase is from 2009 to 2013, covering 45 watersheds. The second phase is from 2014 to 2019, covering additional 90 watersheds. The phase 3 is still ongoing, which covers additional 17 watersheds. The key components of this project include integrated watershed and land management, and also capacity building and land administration. The most important component is the first component, which includes irrigation, forestation, pasture management, etc. I forgot to mention that in our study, we try to, our impact evaluation focus on the phase 1 of this project. Here is a map of phase 1 and phase 2 locations, with the blue dot represent the phase 1 and the yellow represent phase 2. We have a few key innovations of this study. First of all, we use SAFE and EVI as land productivity measures. EVI is a conventional vegetation index, and SAFE is a new product which has shown have higher has better promise than in correlation with GPP, gross primary production. Those are two complementary but different satellite imagery products. So we use them to show our results are robust to different measures. Secondly, SAFE has a GPP product, which provides a directly quantifiable measure of land productivity. This allows us to interpret our findings in terms of both statistical and economic significance. So that helps with cost-benefit analysis. Most importantly, we investigate the program effects on resilience to drought. This is an imperative but understudied research question. In the following presentation, I'm going to talk about the data and our identification strategy, which is difference in difference plus pipeline design. And also we use the event study to test for the parallel trend assumption underlying the DID strategy. And also it shows dynamics in program effects. Next, we show the result about average program effect on productivity using DID strategy. And then we look at drought buffering effect and then conclude. Now the data. So our data rely on public access, available public existing geospatial data sets. This makes our impact evaluation very cost effective. Our analysis unit is pixel year. Using EVI, we have like 1 km pixel, and SAFE, we have 5 km pixel because SAFE has lower resolution than EVI. We focus on the main crop season from June to September. We just mentioned that our outcome variables are SAFE, GPP, and EVI. We use them to measure land productivity. We also have some key control variables, which include rainfall, temperature, elevation, and soil quality, and agroecological zones and percentage area covered by crop and by ridgeland. Next, I talk about identification strategy, which is DID plus pipeline design. Namely, we use phase 2 locations as the control group to estimate program effects of this phase 1 program. This is because phase 1 and phase 2 locations were selected following similar criteria. So we expect those two groups share similar characteristics, both observed and unobserved. We also use DID method. We rely on data from 2002 to 2015. We have 8-year pre-intervention data from 2002 to 2010, and during the intervention period is 2011 to 2015. So that shows a large advantage of using this remote sensing data because we can date back many years before the intervention. This solves a lack of baseline issue. And also in the intervention period, notice that we ended our end year is 2015 because this is restricted by the pipeline design. Our phase 2 start year is 2016. We also use event study to test for parallel trend assumption and to show dynamics of program effects. We next show the event study. I'll skip this model and go directly to the results. So this figure depicts the differences in EVI, our outcome variable, between the treatment and the control locations by year, after controlling for a number of fixed effects and the confounding factors. This vertical dashed line indicates the start year of this program. So on the left side is pre-intervention period, the right side is intervention period. We can see the trend is flat in the pre-intervention period, but after intervention, it seems to have upward trend. And all of those differences, program effects are positive. So this result on the left-hand side suggests that our parallel trend assumption holds in general, and the right-hand side shows that probably the program effect is positive and is higher in the later intervention period. This figure shows the result using SafeGPP. We can see similar pattern. On the right side, it's flat. We don't see a clear trend. On the right hand, we see an upward trend, which is the post-intervention period. We now look at average program effect on productivity using a DID model. Here is a standard DID specification. I index pixel, D index ATZ, and T index year. Y is the outcome variable EVI of SafeGPP, and the T indicates program locations. One post indicates the post-intervention period. We controlled for rainfall, temperature, and their interactions with key terrain and soil quality characteristics. Here, delta I is pixel fixed effects, and gamma DT is ATZ year fixed effects. The parameter of interest is theta, which estimates the average effects of this program during the intervention period. The upper panel of this figure shows our results. So we have like the black circle shows the results from GPP, and this diamond, yellow diamond shows result for the EVI. We see the average effect is 3.6% increase in productivity. To look at the dynamics of in project effects, we separate the intervention period into two sub-periods. Early intervention period and later intervention period. So early intervention period consists of the first 3 years of the program implementation, and later are the 2 years, 2014 to 2015. We can see a much larger effect in the later intervention period than in the earlier intervention period. It's 5.6% versus 2.3%. We're going to discuss this result later, and let's next move to our main results, which is the drought buffering effects. Here we define the drought as large negative deviations from the average rainfall in the specific location. So this definition allows for the climate adaptation of local livelihood. So this figure depicts a proportion of locations under drought by year during our study period. For the treatment location, the solid curve, and the control location, which is the dashed curve. We can clearly see 2009 and 2014, 2015 as the drought years. In those 2 years, those are also our later intervention period. We can see almost 80% of the locations suffered from drought. The upper panel of this figure shows our estimated results for with and without drought. So on the left side is when there's no drought, the program effect is 2.1% increase in productivity. However, when there is a drought, the effect is about 3 times larger, it's 6.3%. Following similar to the earlier study, we separate the program effect, the program period by earlier and later stages. We still see that in the later stages, the program effect is much larger when there is a drought than when there is not drought, about 3 times larger. In the early intervention period, because the drought is very light, we cannot identify the effects when there is a drought. So this result points to a large drought buffering effects of this project. It also helps us understand the underlying channels of this program effect. So here we put our earlier result without considering drought explicitly here on the left panel. And here is our current result after we model drought explicitly. So if we only look at the left results, we would probably draw the conclusion that the higher effect in the later intervention period is probably due to that it takes time for the program effect to materialize. However, when we look at the right-hand side, the result clearly shows that the large effect we observed in later intervention period is mostly driven by the drought buffering effects. We now go to our conclusion. I summarize my key findings. We found that this program has significantly increased land productivity in drought-affected areas by 6.3%, and the effect is 2.1% increase in land productivity in the areas which do not suffer drought. We made 2 contributions. First of all, we provide the first empirical evidence on large effects on resilience to droughts of the sustainable land management projects. Secondly, we show the potential of combining remote sensing technologies with impact evaluation models to assess ecosystem restoration programs. Thank you. So that's all.
Thank you so much, Yan. Really very interesting results, and really appreciate this. I'm now going to just, ask Dr. Bekele Shifero if he can come in. Dr. Bekele is with IEG at the World Bank, and he's a development economist by profession, who has done a lot of work over the years on issues around resources, natural resources management and the environment. So Dr. Bekele Shefero, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Thanks a lot for the opportunity to provide some comments on this useful study, and particularly that it was supported by the World Bank. And I had a privilege of actually looking at these projects, both SLMP 1 and 2 recently, and we did a quick, not this kind of detailed evaluation, but we did a quick study on it, and we reported out. You may have the chance to look at that. So it's a very interesting analysis, and congratulations to my colleagues from IFAD and from Cornell for putting this analysis together. I think, that as Sarah mentioned at the beginning, impact evaluation in natural resource management is something that a lot of development economists and natural resource specialists have been struggling with, and now that we have such remote sensed satellite data over which gives us opportunity to use longitudinal information from treated and control areas. It's a kind of a luxury that's we are coming up with, and we are able to use this. I think it's increasingly promising, very interesting. I am sure that in the same way like you may face in IFAD, in the bank, we face a lot of difficulties when we talk to colleagues who are involved in operations, who tell us that they cannot measure some of this, environmental natural resource outcomes, and these types of tools increasingly becoming available using open source data, I think is increasingly very, very encouraging, and I'm really pleased that especially in this case, the GIS specialists have proposed using the SIF methodology, which seems to have much more significance in terms of measuring primary production from land, and which might be a better approximation for land restoration. So I think that's really the innovative aspect of this evaluation. Just now going to a little bit more on in terms of where I sense probably more could be done or could be done better or based on sort of what I understand. I'm not a GIS specialist myself, but I think we have to be careful when we are trying to use this as a proxy for land productivity. Land productivity generally, if you look at the SLM project document itself, it's very much about measuring agriculture productivity of land, and labor, but primarily land in this case. So the estimated effects could be correlated with the economic values, agriculture productivity, but it's not one and the same. So we have to be careful on that. So I think just nuancing that in such a way that it makes more interpretation possible is better than probably kind of associating immediate economic significance to these biophysical changes or biomass changes that you are measuring using these indices. And just the other thing is on the assumptions themselves. Of course, you are assuming here that all of SLMP1 is treated by 2011, sort of your cutoff date. During our visit to several of the locations, SLMP1 locations, we understood that actually not all were fully treated. I mean, there were the watersheds, the certified watersheds under SLMP1. They involve a lot of micro watersheds within a larger watershed. And what it means is that some of the micro watersheds were treated, but there were many which were not completed, which were actually picked up under SLMP2. So So in some ways, when you say that the entire area of SLMP1 watersheds is treated, it's probably not true, and it may be underestimating the effect in that sense. Although you are now using, of course, pixel level data for that purpose. And then the other assumption on main season only. In our analysis, we actually used, we try to differentiate impacts for all the 3 seasons. In this case, of course, I think your assumption based on sort of the thinking that the estimated GPP is kind of crop production. If you assume that taking the main season is a good could be a good proxy for that, but in reality, that's not the case. There are also short rainy seasons, and the distribution, the production season in the country kind of varies depending on where you are. So I would have liked that you differentiate or estimate the seasonal changes. Across this, there are 3 at least distinct seasons: the dry season, the main crop season, and then what's called the short rainy season or the bulk season in Ethiopia. So it would have been better to do that. And if you find actually significant effects in these other seasons, it will actually strengthen your findings. And biomass particularly is critically relevant in the dry season, especially that many smallholder farmers in Ethiopia are involved both crop and livestock production. They need biomass during the dry season for feeding their animals. So biomass is extremely valuable, especially in the dry season. The same could be true for biomass from the larger rangelands in communal areas in the watershed, which can be used for various things, firewood, et cetera, and then also water. I mean, here you are not bringing in water much in the analysis. In our work, we used land surface water index, LSWI, which is kind of another approximation to where, managing water stress and drought in drought-prone environments. So I don't know why you didn't use that, but water availability, especially in the dry season, is particularly important. On the identification strategy, I mean, you are using, of course, as the rollout approach, of SLMP and SLMP2 as a control for identifying effects on SLMP1. Yeah, since it's fine. I wish you used matching. I mean, we use matching in terms of as an opportunity for controlling observed effects before treatment. So that, I mean, from some of the charts I saw, maybe it's probably fine, but I think if you had to use matching of pixels between SLMP1 and SLMP2 watersheds, especially within the same regional state or the same agroecology, that may have given you opportunities to remove any remaining biases when you are using sort of watershed to watershed. You are not, I guess, controlling some of those issues that may be pre-existing, but could have been done with matching approach. We use, I mean, for your information, we actually evaluated the impact of both SLMP1 and SLMP2. So in your case, SLMP2 is not still evaluated, and you may have to kind of use maybe RLSP now as a control for that, the way in your methodology, but we use 10-kilometer bands to create counterfactuals within the treated watersheds, both for SLMP1 and SLMP2. That way we were able to kind of control for many things, many variables, and then we use also matching for identification. The other aspect which I found interesting was a dynamic effect. You were trying to measure the impact of the intervention in the near term and in the medium term. The near term, I would see in the books in the bank, SLMP1 actually was implemented from 2008 to 2013, and the SLMP2 from 2014 to 2018. So it closed 2018 December. At least there's the bank part of the work. And SLMP, what you call SLMP3 is called RLSP, started after 2019. So that's fine. So in my view, what would probably may be interesting would be for the near term, as you know, in the literature and also in many countries, we have been struggling about, the potentially negative impact of watershed management in the near term. And we have seen this in Ethiopia for many years. When you are actually, installing physical conservation structures, terracing, etc., on agricultural land, in the near term, there is a potential that actually productivity will go down. That may be surprising, but that has been sort of observed, for unless and otherwise, and it also takes some land out of production when you put the structures. When SLMP kind of puts the soils, the stone bunds, different types of structures on agricultural land, it reduces the net land area that is put into production. So it may have a potential to reduce productivity, and you are not taking that into account. So the reason I'm raising this is because in the near term, also on rangelands, there is they are putting what they call area closures. There is a restriction on land use, which means like until the land begins to restore itself, you are avoiding any use or intervention in that area. So far, land users, resource users cannot harvest anything from that particular area. It's kind of controlled, so it's called area closure. So in the area closures, no disturbance, no harvesting of biomass is allowed. So which means that in the first few years, both on agricultural land and on the rangeland, the communal land in the watershed, productivity actually in the sense of the farmer may go down, and that is sort of very important. I wish we were able to kind of pick that up, and I would say that at least for the first few years, 2009, 2011 or so, or 13, that short term might be negative from a farmer's perspective, and if we find that, then that is sort of the policy relevant in the sense that you need incentives for small farmers to be able to actually utilize or adopt some of these investments. We need to kind of compensate them for that potential loss, and I think this would have been interesting, if you can find some ways of kind of identifying this effect, so that in the immediate term, you can think of payments for ecosystem services types of approaches or other types of incentives, which make it possible for farmers to actually, still allow regeneration of the resource and still maintain their welfare. The way it is happening now, while restoration is happening, this biomass may grow. The farmers actually, in terms of their productivity on land, on agricultural land, and as well as the communal land, they may not be benefiting from it, and they are actually restricted. They cannot access it, etc. And there could be welfare loss involved in that. My final comment is on the resilience thinking about the effect of drought, which you have brought in. I think I wasn't entirely sure what exactly we are measuring there. In some of the lines I saw, you seem to be saying that program effect is more than threefold larger in locations with drought. I mean, you cannot have larger impact in affected areas. What may make sense, I think, is that when you compare treated areas and non-treated areas in the presence of drought, areas which have been treated will be less affected. Okay, and the impact of the drought, the effect of the drought on those treated areas would be much less than the ones which are not treated. And that is sort of, the drought reduces the sensitivity. I mean, the treatment or the watershed management, the SLMP interventions reduce the sensitivity to drought. Not just the recovery, but just the sensitivity to drought is reduced because there is better vegetation cover, better soil water holding capacity, as a result, the sensitivity and in some ways also the exposure itself might be less. And as a result, in the presence of drought, if you compare treated and non-treated areas, treated areas are likely to be less sensitive, and in the long term, you can think of resilience, but it's more sensitive, reduced sensitivity, and the ability or the impact of drought on treated areas is much less than non-treated areas. Maybe that sort of argument might be better than sort of generically saying resilience to drought or other language that you are using is happening because of the SLMP treatments. So I think what I find is that overall the evaluation presents a much more positive and positive impact of SLMP, which may not be realistic on the ground, and also that heterogeneous effects are very important. The SLMP didn't treat everybody in the watershed the same way. There are different types of resource users, and these resource, there are small farmers, medium-scale farmers, the landless, women. They are all they are all affected in different ways, and some of them particularly, for example, because of area closures, women have to travel long distances to look for, sometimes to look for fodder or fuel wood for home use. So there are some negative effects and heterogeneous impacts for different types of users. So we have to be careful on how much we can go using this kind of approach, using remote sense data when we are trying to kind of generalize the effects of an intervention on the livelihoods of resource users. So just have to be cautious, and findings are probably fine, but we have to kind of, I think, highlight the shortcomings or where we are not able to generalize, and the caveats that are involved, and of course, that you mentioned in the beginning, this kind of evaluation cannot be done using surveys. True, but you cannot survey methodology the way economists run surveys. It cannot be used for measuring biophysical change like this. Yeah, this method is very good for measuring biophysical change overall. But if you want to see what is happening on the livelihoods of the people, the survey method is better. So, the survey method, the traditional survey methodology, we cannot completely do away with that. I think if we want to understand the heterogeneous effects of interventions on human livelihoods, on people, the resource users, I think this kind of methodology needs to be complemented by survey methodology. The problem has been that we have been using surveys to measure everything, but surveys don't work for measuring biophysical change. So the better approach is, I think, to mix both, and surveys can help us understand the impacts on livelihoods. And then the GIS approach, remote sense data, is much better suited for understanding the larger biophysical changes and the land restoration within watersheds. So thank you very much. Back to you, Edward.
No, thank you so much, Bekele. I don't know, you want to say something in response, Sonia, quickly?
Yeah. I want to
open it up for others to speak.
Right.
Sure.
I actually want to thank you for a very extraordinary, useful comments. So it's a long list, and let me go it one by one. First, thank you for this excellent, you did an excellent report. I read it and we studied it. I learned a lot from it. Actually, this study is partly inspired by your study, which is, I think, by Ali Claude-Benninger and Mo Chak, right? Probably it's ecological economics, I think. Yeah, that's an excellent piece. And also, thank you for highlighting our contribution of using the SAFE TPP to proxy for land production, land productivity. And as you pointed out, that is different from crop production. And that we have explained at the discussion part of this paper. Due to time limit, we don't have time to explain it. But you are right, we should be careful about when we're talking about land productivity. Actually, we kind of like people may be confused by think it's, we mentioned the crop agriculture productivity. We should be careful about our language. Another thing is about we understand that not all micro watershed is treated. We also discussed it in our paper. The thing is we don't know which micro watershed is actually treated. I have several discussions with the World Bank colleagues and with Daniel Malchuk and also project implementer. It seems we don't have information on that. So our study basically look at intention to treat estimator. About interpretation, you just mentioned about the separate by seasons. This is a very useful comment, and the reason we focus on the main season, as you said, I start, we wanted to look at crop production, but later on we feel like we have enough results to present in this paper. It would clearly be a very valuable extension to include other seasons. And also about water. So that is used in your report. And I think that is also a useful expansion for later research. And also about we use our identification method comparing to we use a rollout plan. And we also considered using spatial discontinuity, but we realized that it has a problem because such program effect can go beyond the boundary of this program area. So if you use the spatial discontinuity to look at the nearby area, it's contaminated by the program impacts, which will result in underestimate of this program effects. And also watersheds are quite special area. Right, so we think using watersheds as treatment as control for watershed is more reasonable than using some random nearby locations. We also compared the soil quality and terrain characteristics between the nearby area and the treatment area, and between the our rollout, our control area. It seems our control area has closer, similar, more similar soil property and terrain characteristics than the nearby locations. And also about the dynamic effects, it's I should have mentioned it in this study. We made the start time of phase 2 to be phase 1 to be 2011. But actually the program started officially in 2008. The reason we look at, we changed the start time as we change it, we assign it as the denoted as effective start time. When we look at the budget disbursement curve, it seems that in 2008, there's no budget disbursement, which probably means the project hasn't actually started. Right, and in 2010, the disbursement is less than 30%. So we use 2011 as program start period. I think it's reasonable, but what you mentioned about negative effects during the earlier period, I think it's also very, very interesting, and that is we haven't thought of it, and we will look forward to look into that area later on. And another question, what is about resilience? Yes, what your explanation is very accurate. And thank you. And about heterogeneity in effects, you are right, and we should address that survey data is complementary to this kind of study. This kind of study really cannot address heterogeneity issue. And I also want to point out that this study is part of our report of the impact evaluation. In the other two parts, we have two other papers which use survey data to look at the effects on actual households.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Janyan. And thanks a lot for already answering some of the questions that we are receiving. So we're going to segue into the question and answers segment. And one of the questions actually, which was asked, had to do with, it's related to what Bekele raised on land productivity. So Sami Ochati is asking, how can we make sure that EVI or SIF GPP increase is due to an effective increase of land productivity, or it could be due to other things, so including weeds, for example. Also that there was about the range, I think it's about the rangelands with respect to what is really being captured or measured vis-a-vis what we were talking about in terms of crop production or the pastures, because even in terms of pastures, the grasses could be different quality as it pertains to what's useful for livestock. So I think you kind of touched on it. And maybe, I don't know if you want to quickly say something on it before we move to the next question.
That's a very good question. Actually, we don't know. So that is a shortcoming of this study, which is discussed in this paper, because we only look at GPP, gross primary production, which is, we don't know the land use. We have rough map about land use in each pixel. So that would be the next step. And maybe Susanna and Jiaming can give a better explanation about what next step to go to from the GPP to the crop production. So if you want to move.
Yes, please. Yeah. Susanna or John, I don't know who is going to take the question.
And Jiaming, who want to, Jiaming, do you want to talk about it? Oh, Susanna, are you here? I think they're here.
I think
Susanna?
She should be here. I can't see if.
Yeah, she is here. Allowed to talk. Okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Go ahead, please.
Hi, thank you all for your comments, and thank you, Janyan, for the presentation. I think actually Yamin will be the best one to answer this question, but the thing is, like, today, this is still an active area of research. So the process to convert GPP to actual crop production is still being researched. We cannot do that that conversion yet, but is, I think, in 2 or 3 years, according to what is being investigated in Cornell and Jean Soon's team, they say that we will be able to get to this conversion soon. So we will be able to actually, with uncalibrated models, without gathering any yield information from or production information from the ground, we will be able to do this conversion from satellite imagery GPP to crop production, but this is not yet possible today.
Thank you. Jiaming, do you want to add a few words?
Yeah, I surely agree, and I think that's one of our future work we proposed in the paper. And I think we would incorporate higher resolution land cover images and other productivity related images, so that we can distinguish which part is the cropland, which part is the rangeland, and some other land cover types. But currently, I think we can only use our data to define the land productivity, but not really disentangle the contribution from different land cover types.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And actually, this responds to another question that was asked by Jie Guo, who was asking, since both the EVI and SIF cannot differentiate changes of crop types or land use on the ground, the increase of their values could be caused by vegetation changes, which is not necessarily an increase in land productivity. So I think there is, in a way, you've responded to this with respect to, crop production or, pasture productivity for agriculture and livestock production. Moving on to another question here, we have a question, it's a clarification question from Fabrizio Feloni of IFAD. Very, very interesting, thanks. Just a basic question, in the case of no drought areas, 2.1% increase is total over 5 years, or is it 2.1% on average per annum? I don't know if you can quickly respond. This is a clarification question.
Thank you for this question. And so it's basically, it's 2.3%. It's increase over those 3 years. So average, that means it's average. So it considers the impact post intervention and before intervention. What is difference? So it's basically, it's like every year there is an increase of 2.3, but that doesn't mean the second intervention year has a higher 2.3 compared to the previous year, right? Intervention year. So it's compared between the post-intervention period and the pre-intervention period. Did that answer your question?
I think it does answer the question. I don't think we can actually get them to speak.
Oh, okay.
They're sending us the questions by chat.
Okay.
There's a separate question here, which is really about the product. So David Spielman is asking, can you tell us more about SIF GPP product? What kind of resolution does it offer? And how well does it work? How does it stand up against, ground truthing? I think you might have addressed part of this in your presentation, but if you can quickly respond, thank you.
Jiaming, could you address this question? Jiaming is a real expert on SIF.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So in this paper, actually, we use 2 SIF data sets. And so one is called GoSIF, and also the authors, the authors for GoSIF also produced the GoSIF based GPP product, and we use that in our paper. And also for myself, I also spent a few, 1 or 2 years to develop another SIF product, and we also use that in our paper as a complementary data sets. And back to your question, both SIF data sets or SIF GPP data sets are offered at 0.05 degree spatial resolution. That is approximately 5 kilometer. Let me see. And as for its validation versus the grounding truth, I think currently, this is a very, very tough task, I would say. People have tried to validate our SIF SIF satellite products versus the tower or airborne measurements. For my own product, we validate our SIF products with some airborne measurements and the ground measurements, but overall it's quite limited. And over the past years, people have built up more towers to measure ground SIF, and I think in the future we will develop a network for SIF tower measurements, and then with that we will have better opportunity to validate our SIF products.
Thank you for that response. There is a separate, it's more of a, I think, a comment here from Andy Rowe, who is talking about the fact that they're using GIS for an ex-ante evaluation of a development policy in Uganda, and that it lets them go to go to the place of intervention without actually getting there. I think he's pointing out the advantages of this approach, and I think indeed this is an approach that can be used. Especially in these times when people cannot travel to various locations. But I think it does also have its limitations, as pointed out by Bekele earlier, that, there are certain things we cannot measure with this approach, and perhaps it's more of a complement to some of the survey work that allows us to measure some of the household level economic and livelihoods outcomes. Then a separate question here is about, it's from, again, from Zhe Guo. Also, how is drought defined? Does the model capture the spatial variation of drought, duration, and severity among the pixels? I don't know who could answer this. Is it Jiaming again?
Maybe Susanna can answer how the drought is generated, and also we didn't measure the duration of drought, but that is a very good comment. We should consider it later on.
Yeah, sure. So we take like the precipitation, average monthly precipitation of all the years considered. So in this case, 2002, 2015. And we generate the monthly average precipitation over that period, right? And then at the pixel level, we define negative deviations, negative standard deviations from that average precipitation. So, for example, if that season, because we average at the season level, if that season has a monthly average precipitation lower than 1.5 standard deviations from that 12-year, 13-year average, we consider that is a drought. I don't know if I explained myself.
Yes, I think that was quite clear. I think in essence, you've basically used a statistical definition, right, in terms of the, the sort of how far away from the mean, if I understood you correctly.
Yeah,
okay.
We followed, I think this is a pretty standard procedure. Like I think Jin-Soon team also uses this procedure when they identify droughts at higher geographical levels.
Right. No, thanks. And then maybe this is the last sort of question that we have here. Is the methodology documented and available? And this is a question from Jose Caceres. Is it available? Can people access it?
The methodology in this paper, we have explained clearly in detail where we downloaded this data, how the data is compiled, how the estimation method is used. I think hopefully later on when we are going to send this paper for journal publication. Once it's published, we will put all of our coding and data in the public domain.
Thank you so much for that, Yan and team. And with that, I think we've come to the end of our webinar today. I would just like to say a word of thanks to the team, the co-authors, as well as to our discussant, Bekele. Thank you so much. And to all the participants who attended and have shared their questions and been with us throughout the session. Thank you so much, and we'll look forward to the next webinar, and have a great day, and thank you. Goodbye.
Yeah, thank you very much for having us, and it's a great pleasure to